You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 195. If I kept trying, it could have worked. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, Breakup Coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy. Hello, beautiful brave hearts. How is everyone doing today? Have an amazing guest, Jewel. I am so excited to have her on today's podcast episode. She is a Braveheart alumni who went through the Get Over Your Ex program, but also, and almost more importantly, she's a dear friend of mine as well as a coach colleague. So I'm really excited to talk all things breakup and heartbreak and all the things that we talk about here on the Get Over Your Ex podcast. So thank you so much, Jewel, for joining us. Why don't you go ahead and just start with like a quick introduction about who you are, what you do, where are you in the world? Tell us all the things.
Yeah. I'm so excited to be here. And it's kind of fun. Like I can't remember the saying, but like long time listener. Like, first time on the podcast is so fun. But um my name is Jewel Hohman. You gotta use like the gross part of your throat to say my last name. And I live in Michigan, which I like to call America's High Five. And I am a full-time coach that helps people go from socially anxious to socially delighted and magnetic. And I help people go from lonesome to deeply connected, especially with like meaningful friendships. So yeah, that's what I do. And I'm a proud alumni of the Braveheart program.
And it's just so fun to chat with you because we've been in so many containers together. And then to have you as a client, it's a whole extra like thing that it's delicious to me. I'm so grateful to like be in containers alongside of you and then also be able to be your coach. It was just so fun to me. So thank you. Let's dive in. Why don't you start out with just tell us a little bit about your breakup story? What led you to joining the Get Over Your Ex program?
Yeah, so my ex and I broke up February of 2022, and right now, at the time we're recording this, it's like late June of 2023. And at the time that we broke up, so I initiated the breakup, and I did it after really realizing that I wasn't going to get what I truly wanted for myself and for my life out of this relationship. Um, and like there's like any, I feel like breakup story or any relationship story, there's a thousand things I could say about that, but that's like the simplest explanation. And you had a training actually um, in April, I think, of that year, like the 5-day training. And so I went to that and I felt like, just giving myself that space to look at what I was thinking about myself, about that relationship, about my future was so helpful. And that training, again, especially with everything that you give, worksheet wise, exercise wise, and then watching the other people get coached as well, it was just so helpful for me. I was like, oh, awesome. Like I got this, right? Just from that training. And I can't remember. I think that training's free. So, right? Like it was so
Yeah,
good.
I think back then it was free. It's now $17, but still, like, that's the price of three coffees.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously. And again, it was so helpful. And I was like, awesome. Like I got this. And I really held space for that for a while. And just by doing like that 5-day training, it was actually so perfect too, because at the time I had COVID. So I was just like sitting doing the trainings, thinking about it. And I was actually telling my friend about it, who was going through a breakup at the time too. Yeah, it was so fun. But months later, even as I was, starting to like see other people, I ran into my ex. And all of these like emotions and all of these like thoughts started coming up. And I really realized that I was still hoping and believing that this was supposed to be the relationship, like the partnership of my life. And and talking with him was so fun. Like I was telling my friends afterwards, it was like bestie hour because we're like, oh, how's this? And this is what this person's doing. Isn't it crazy? Like it was nice. And like I was making it mean all of these things that I know for sure he wasn't making it mean. Um, so it was after that moment I went and I just felt heartbroken and like cracked open all over again. And I knew I could apply what you have already given me and be okay. But in that moment, being in that much pain, I was like, I don't want to deal with this alone. And like, clearly, some I'm having some thoughts that I didn't realize I was having about my ex that I really want to focus on and deal with. Because at the time, I had met now my current partner, and I was like, I really want to, and whether it was, me being with my current partner or anybody else, like I didn't want to still have these like underlying, like background, low humming thoughts. Because I was definitely comparing like my current partner to my ex and doing things like that. I just knew I wanted to deal with it. And so in that moment, I went and I signed up for the Get Over Your Ex program. And I know I was telling you this, like, even as we jumped on, but that program, the way you have it set up and the way that you like the timing, like the 3 months was such a great container for me. And you give like a recommended schedule, like everything was so clear. And so I just immediately like jumped right on into the program. And especially with how you have us like track our progress, it was it was just everything that I needed at that time. And I 1,000% by that, like I think it's like 100 days, right? By that 100th day, I was 1,000% over my ex. And I had gotten really clear on what I wanted for myself and for my life, and got really clear on like, okay, does my current partner fit, that lifestyle that I want for me, rather than how can we like kind of come together, which you do have to do a little bit in a relationship. But that was definitely not a conversation I had in my past relationship with myself, until the very end. So yeah, that's like my overall breakup story.
I love that. So I think one thing that I want to call out, because I think that I actually have a pretty big audience of therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, other coaches who listen into the podcast. And I know that as a coach, when you're going through your own personal whirlwind, especially in the realm that you coach on or help other people in, it's easy to have a lot of shame that you haven't figured it out, or that,
Mhm.
I know this stuff logically or conceptually. Why am I not applying it? Or why am I not showing up in alignment with these things, or things like that? And one of the, I was talking with Jenny, actually, Jenny Blake, you know her. I was talking with
Mhm.
her and we were chatting about the analogy that she gave me that was just so helpful in my mind when we were talking about something, was that, brain surgeons don't, they can't operate on themselves. Even
Mhm.
if there was some sort of cool tool where you could stay awake for a brain surgery and see through a mirror, you're not even seeing like the full perspective from the outside looking in. You're seeing a reflection of something in the mirror. It's still not going to be the same. Like a brain surgeon
Yeah.
cannot do brain surgery on themselves. And that doesn't mean we can't self-coach ourselves and become aware of things, but kind of what you were saying of, there were these underlying beliefs that I still had that I didn't see. And instead of
Mhm.
shaming yourself about that, you just got to be curious about it and go ask for help to get an outsider's opinion. And I think that's a beautiful place to be in. And I just want to like applaud you for doing that, because it's a slippery slope in terms of going to the place of just beating ourselves up or having a lot of negative self-talk because we can't figure it out, quote unquote, we can't figure it out on our own, right?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. I have so many things to say about that. I think part of the reason why it was because in that moment I was like, okay, I'm doing this was because I knew that it would just make everything faster for me. It was not about, oh, I can't work through this. It was just about, I don't want to feel this way right now. Right. And that's it. And I love that analogy so much. I love Jenny Blake so much. Um, but at the end of the day, I like to think, okay, like I'm a human first and a coach second, because I notice that too. I won't get on my soapbox about this, but I find because I will coach coaches as well. And there's almost like a thought of I should know better,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like a little
Yep.
bit of that. And it's like these are tools for you. And that's how I thought about it too. Was like I'm just gonna expand my toolbox. Like yeah, I didn't know you could increase deliberately your desire for somebody or deliberately like decrease it. Like I want to spend time with somebody who's, you know, like already figured that out and laid it out. Like it has nothing to do with my abilities and just everything to do with like I love myself and I don't want to have this pain anymore.
Yeah. And you're like, I want to play with a new tool. It's like playing with a new tool, playing with a new perspective, playing with someone who's done it a little bit differently than you. And it's just so much fun. Once you've been in one coaching container, you realize like all these things that feel hard or difficult, I could actually just hire someone to help me move through them. And it can be a fun process instead of like a
Mhm.
completely miserable one. Um, Another analogy that came to mind recently that I also love is I used to get my eyelashes done. I love having lash extensions. I am now allergic and I can't have them
Oh
anymore.
no.
But what I find really funny is that my lash lady couldn't do her own lashes and she didn't always wear lashes, but I never made that mean she wasn't good at what she did. She was literally the best lash tech I've ever seen or ever had in my entire life. And she could put like a full set of classics on in like 45 minutes, and her fills were like 20 to 30 minutes long. And she should have been charging like double what she charged. But I don't know. I think it's very similar in a coaching realm of, just remember not to shame yourself or beat yourself up or think you should already know this. And even if you're not a coach, but you've been
Mhm.
like deep in self help, it doesn't mean that you should be able to see every single thought that you have. You should be able to like be through this. It might be a brand new concept, like you just mentioned, of like desires. I haven't reduced or increased desire purposefully in an intentional way before.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so tell us about, what was really the biggest struggle that you had, or what did you struggle with most when it came to getting over your ex and building the bigger and better life?
Yeah, so I think those underlying beliefs, which again, there's like two sides, of course, like probably with so many other people listening. Like I knew I wasn't going to get what I wanted for my life and my life experience being in this relationship anymore. And even with knowing that and being so compelled by that, right, to end the relationship, there was still this question of maybe if this went a little differently, then we could have had this. Maybe if this went a little differently, maybe if I had this information, I could finally like close it. And I find that true. And I actually want to use like a different example of this with like something else because you pointed that out to me, like you can answer your own questions was so helpful. And this is true for like a lot of times my clients, they will kind of have like I like to say social perfectionistic tendencies. I didn't come up with that term, but it's just the best way to describe it, where they will be like, oh, I could have shown up differently in this social interaction, and then maybe this or this or this would be better. And there's always something that you could have done differently in a social interaction, always, especially because like what is just right for you is not just right for somebody else as far as socially interacting goes. And I think that really applies here as well. Like there would, in any relationship, there was always going to be like certain things that you could and I was really letting my mind like go back to that, like back to that hope. But there's always going to be things that you could look at and be like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Like little things. And again, like it just helped me so much to address those things myself. So that way I could go back into my other beliefs about that. Again, like I felt so compelled in to end the relationship. And I was very heartbroken, but I just knew, being in that relationship for so long that it wasn't going it wasn't going to change. And our what we wanted out of a relationship was very different, and even with knowing that, hopefully I'm making sense, but but that
Yeah.
was so huge and just so helpful, just to be like, there's always going to be things, but ultimately, like, where's the scale? Because I think a lot of us are trying to, especially this goes for any decision, whether the decision would be to go to college or not to go to college, there's always like 1,000 things or 1,000 what ifs, and you can't answer them all, or have that person or somebody else tell you, so that way you make the perfect decision. You can
Mhm.
just decide what you want to do and then answer like those objections that your brain comes up with.
And I think you bring up a really good point. I know a
Yeah.
lot of people they're in that place of like, I know that this isn't what I want, but I still am ruminating about him, or I'm still ruminating about him and this new partner. Or, I know this isn't what I want, but I still find myself checking his social media, things like that.
Mhm.
And I always say, when I see that happening, there's always kind of like three things that we can start to assess. Number one, the desire for your ex. Number two, the attachment you have to them being able to help you create the future that you want. And number three, if your desire and your attachment are all the way reduced, but this is still happening, a lot of times I ask, are you living your bigger and better life now? Because when you're in a life that you love and you genuinely wake up and are like eager and excited, and you're doing all the things that you desire to do, you're being the version of you want to be, it's, I mean, you aren't constantly thinking about your ex. You're just
Mhm.
not. You're so consumed in your own life and enjoying your own life that your ex might be a thought, but you're not constantly spinning out and spiraling out about that person.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, what do you feel like when it came to, you know, that struggle and any other struggles that you had within the program? What were your biggest turning points? Do you remember? You graduated a while back, so.
Yeah, no, I do remember. Definitely answering those questions myself. Again, I cannot say it enough. And that's something that I have told my current clients, because they'll be like, oh, this person is judging me. It's like, okay, what do you ultimately think about how you showed up? And then, right, like answer like those other objections and so on. It's so helpful to give that power to yourself. Um, I can't say it enough. It was so huge. There was something else. Hopefully it comes back to me.
Mhm.
But okay, it'll come back to me. I remember I was going to talk about my current partner, so hopefully it just hits me as I talk about him.
Yeah.
But uh yeah. Um but it was so like what you just said about your current life now, and like if you enjoy your life so much now, you're not thinking about your ex or like wishing for that. And that is so unbelievably true, because of us identifying to what I wanted for myself, I was then able to show up to dates or show up to meeting people and not like assess in like a super all or nothing kind of way, but just to kind of like play with and see like, okay, does this person like align with what I want for me? And now I have that. And our relationship truly is like the best relationship I've ever been in. It feels so safe. We've been together for almost like a year, and which is crazy. And we've been through like a bunch of changes, but the way we were able to communicate and the way we are like intentionally building our life together, I really owe that to identifying, and instead of just feeling like, oh, do I like this person or not? Because that's how it was in the past. And
Mhm.
instead, it's just, does this person align with what I want for myself in my life? That was really huge. And then I
Oh my
did
God.
remember the other thing.
Oh, you remember the other thing? Because I'm
You go
like,
ahead.
I really want to touch on that because I think a lot of people get hung up on like, my ex moved on quickly and moved on to this new girl, or they had an affair and moved on to this new girl, and they take it personally and make it about them and say that I wasn't enough, I wasn't worthy, she's better than me. Instead of recognizing it's all about alignment, it's about want matches. It's like, are you a good match with this person? It doesn't,
Mhm.
and that doesn't make you any less worthy or more worthy if you're a match for a particular human being. There's billions of humans on this planet, and some of them match and work together, while as some do not. And it doesn't have anything to do with making you a good or a bad person, or worthy or not worthy, or valuable or not valuable. It is much more having to do with like, do you guys want the same things? Do you guys like functioning in the same way? Do you want to be headed in the same direction? Do you guys want to live in the same place? Do you like the careers that you have? Do you live the same kind of lifestyle? Those are all alignments and matches or mismatches, and has nothing to
Yeah.
do with worth. So I'm glad you brought that up. So tell me your other thing. I'm very excited.
Yeah, and I mean, I that is just the truest thing in the world, because there are not enough words to describe like the relationship that I'm in now, and not from like a fairy tale, like, oh, like rose colored glasses. It's 1,000% like the realest thing. We communicate, we go together, but it really is because I assessed for want matches. 1,000%, like that's the reason. And us co-creating now. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you feel like when you did that activity of really getting clear about dating, like your intention, figuring out what you want, all of that, do you feel like that helped you reduce desire and attachment for your ex?
Yeah, 1,000%. Because I realized just over again and just reinforced to myself that, and it, and I think this is kind of interesting. So somebody else probably can relate to this, because my ex at one point was very emotionally attuned. And I am somebody that, I connect through, and I just love, like, tell me about your thoughts and your feelings, right? Like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about like human behavior. And uh, he was somebody at one point that was attuned, but he hadn't been that way for a couple years, right? And so one thing that I was tempted to hang on to was, oh, he could be that way again, right? But the thing is, like, what was happening now was not that. Again, I gave that relationship after noticing that he wasn't being this way anymore. Like 2 years of my life, how much more was I going to give it? Uh, and leaving that was so helpful, because again, now like this partner that I have in that activity, I can't even remember the question that you asked me, so sorry. I hope I'm answering it, but just like that activity and that like creating that, it's I really can't put it into words what it's like to experience, and to experience it feels for the first time in my life like a true partnership of like co-creating and building together, because what we want to like aligns.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
110%. I think the biggest thing is like the way I describe it is it's the difference between dragging your partner along, trying to convince
Yes.
them and prove like this is the way we should go and this is what we should do. And I want you to come with me and like let's make it happen. And constantly overcoming their objections as to why they don't want to do what you're
Mhm.
doing, versus finding someone who naturally and organically wants to do all of those things with you and is already doing them. So then when you meet up in this
Yeah.
partnership together, it's such an easy co-creation. It's such an easy relationship because you're both already moving in that direction and you're not dragging them along. They're almost like, I'm so excited. Are you ready? We've already gone. Like, let's go. Let's keep going. It's just a very different energy.
Yeah,
It reminds
exactly.
me, it reminds me of like my one of my relationships. in the past, I really wanted to move to Florida. And I was like so devastated. Like I kept being like, let's move to Florida. Let's move to Florida. And we were in Boston. He's like, I'll live anywhere except for Florida. And I'm like, what? And our relationship was great, like best relationship ever. I have only good things to say. It was just that one thing. And it's so hard to let go of a relationship when it's like one thing. But that one thing to me was really big. To me, it was big, not to everyone. Some people would be like, oh, yeah, I don't really care about living in Florida. So it's not a big deal. But then that made us a want match mismatch. And as soon as I left Florida, I was able to find someone who already wanted to be in Florida, who was much more of a match, in much more of an alignment in comparison to like wanting a family, settling down, doing all the things that I genuinely wanted to do. And it like took off like wildfire in comparison to constantly trying to like drag my previous partner, being like, here's all the reasons we should move to Florida, creating a fucking presentation or something, being like, this is what we should do and why, and here are the benefits and like all of this stuff. And pretty much having to do everything for him to get that completed and done versus just, being with someone who already wanted all of that.
Yes. And I think it's tempting, like what we talked about earlier, it's tempting to just be like, oh, I could, think better about this, right? Like I could deal with this. But like you said, it was a big deal to you. And for me, it was a big deal for me to not have that emotional connection anymore.
Yeah.
And the way you described it too, it's almost like you do this for a living, but the way you described it was so clear and so concise. But for anybody listening that may be in, a space where they're feeling really raw, I just want you to hear this. With my ex in that relationship, because I didn't have that want match, it was not being fulfilled, and I was constantly trying to shape shift myself. It was so much more effort to do that. And like it was so much heavier that ending that relationship and working through the heartbreak, it feels to this day, and it's not that hard things haven't happened since then, since a year plus, right? It's not that hard things haven't happened, but let me tell you, taking off the backpack of that emotional weight is life-changing. I am like so much more goofy. Like I've forgotten how funny I was, and how goofy I was and how light I am. I like, am constantly like jumping around. And again, it's not that hard things haven't happened, but I'm able to like deal with those being in a relationship like that where you are dragging somebody is truly affecting every other area of your life. And then when you are with somebody where you have this partnership that really aligns, it up levels every aspect of your life. The way I handle stress in my business, right? The way I feel about myself, my self-image, truly everything. And it has nothing to do, like, don't get me wrong, my current partner, Aaron, amazing person, but it's not his doing. It's like my thoughts and like our relationship, right? Like our partnership that is really
It's the ease of
Yes.
that partnership, because here's what also is happening for those of you who are shape shifting. I love that word. I love that you brought that into play, because especially coming in, like when you start a relationship and it's all great and amazing, and then they change, and then you are shape shifting to try to like fit into this new version of them that's not working. And then you're like sitting there missing what was, and you're thinking maybe they can go back to that way. All of what you just said, it was brilliant and amazing. But secondly, what's happening is as you're trying to shape shift, I put that in quotes, what you're really doing is you're trying almost to do thought work around it so that you can think and feel good about a situation you don't actually want to think and feel good about.
Yes, exactly.
I spent 2 years in my relationship with Matthew doing that, where I was doing so much thought work on our relationship. And I'm so glad that I did, because I think I needed that to see what it's like to do thought work around something that I really just want to change the sea on. I just want to
Mhm.
change the circumstance on that
Mhm.
instead of constantly trying to do thought work about it. And that doesn't mean that's going to be the same for everyone. So I say that, and please know that that might not necessarily be for you, but it is like a feeling. It's a body experience that you will notice. And if you are able to shed that backpack, it feels really good.
Yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
is so much easier to do thought work now because I'm not, like you said, fighting against something that I actually don't want to change. It's
Mhm.
so much easier. Like if something happens, because don't get me wrong, um, so growing up uh and even before the Get Over Your Ex program, I did a lot of work on my attachment style. Like so many other people, like having stuff happen in the past, I had a lot of relationship issues. And I will say too this, because I want anybody that is listening that might have this experience to hear this too. Because one thought that I had that kept me in that relationship that was dragging me down was, oh, because we were together for like 3.5 years, was, oh, well, I didn't really work on myself before. And I will say it, not necessarily proudly, but with ownership, that I was like the crazy girlfriend because I had so much I had like a fearful avoidant attachment style for anybody that's curious. So I was like a roller coaster, and truly my ex shut down a lot of that emotional connection because of how, not, like that I jumped into his body and made him shut down, but a lot of it was because of how I was behaving in the beginning. And so I stayed in that relationship again for like 2 years after that happened. And after I had like really worked on myself and really was like, I mean, I can honestly say for those 2 years, I really showed up in the best ways that I knew how and really like worked to change my attachment style. And like you can't, if somebody else can't, meet you halfway, they just can't anymore. And it's, for so long I was tempted to be like, oh, it was my fault. So I just wanted to share that with anybody that might be in a similar situation. It might be helpful to hear, because I know for me, listening to like Braveheart stories at the time when they would just be so candid, it was so helpful. So I just want to share that. um but but yeah, it's one thing that was super helpful. I want to make sure I remember it. um Oh man, my brain's just going so fast. I'm just so excited.
I know, because there's so many things to talk about too, and
So
so many
many.
directions we can go in.
Hmm.
110%. Well,
Yeah.
were there any other, because we were talking about like big turning points. So were there
Yes.
any other big turning points that you can remember?
Thank you. My ADHD brain appreciates you. Yes. So there was another big turning point. Yes. Okay, here we go. This is why it all flows. So again, I had done a lot of work on how I showed up in relationships and how I relate to other people. But one thing that was really helpful in the Get Over Your Ex program was to spend time with, how do I want to be in a relationship, and who do I want to be uh in the world, and like what kind of things do I want to kind of leave in the past. That was so helpful to, I hadn't given airtime to that in that way. I don't know if I ever have. I've just been like self-coaching on, oh, here's how I don't want to be, but thinking about how I do want to be in the new relationship, so helpful. And I don't believe that we can like fully, quote unquote, like heal an attachment spot style, especially if it's like trauma based. But let me tell you, I am a different freaking person. The way I show up in relationships is so different, and I'm able to hold, when I do get, because for me, what shows up is like I like get distrustful and I'll shut down. When that happens, when I have an urge to like really do that, I am able to hold it and communicate it in such a way. And that's partially because I identified beforehand, right? Like hugely because I identified beforehand how I wanted to show up in relationships, right? And I'm able to have compassion for myself. And my partner and I, we even joke about it. And I don't know how you feel about like swearing and stuff, but I call it so if it is, My bad.
No, you can swear. I swear all day
Okay.
long on the
I
podcast.
was
So
like,
you're fine.
I can't remember. I listen to this podcast so much going through my heartbreak. And but yeah, okay. So I call it like fuck it attitude where I'm just like and I would shut down. And I will even like say like oh, I'm getting like my fuck it attitude, like my fuck it attitudes like coming up. And again, that was such a turning point for me because I identified who I wanted to be in the relationship. And that doesn't mean like perfect, right? And like the absence of the quote unquote bad things, but really identifying how I can like hold myself in that and giving airtime to that was so helpful. And I really got the opportunity to look at that through thinking about how do I want to be and what would help me be that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good skill to have just in general for everyone listening is how do I want to be in a relationship, but also what do I want in a partner and what do I want in my bigger and better life? One of the things that I see from clients who come to me is they're very clear about what they don't want in a partner. They're very clear about what they don't want in their bigger and better life. They're clear about what they don't, how they don't want to be showing up, like you had mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But start exploring the opposite. If you're not doing those things, if you don't have a partner with those things, if you don't have a life with those things, what do you have? What's on the other side of that? I was literally just coaching a client recently on her bigger and better life, and she was talking about a career change. And I'm like, well, what do you want to change your career to? And she's like, well, honestly, I think I just don't want a job. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's open that up. Let's look at that. But if you don't do a job, what are you doing? And it was a really
Yeah.
fascinating like conversation that we went down, but you've got to get clear about like what's that space going to be filled with if you don't have something.
Yes. Yeah.
So good.
So helpful. And then one thing that you really helped with, and I know so many other people struggle with, and it's very evident that you have coached on this a lot and talked about this a lot because dealing with these thoughts alone, like there's like a whole, I think you have like a whole like journal, some like questions about this, but about when your partner like finds somebody new and what you want it to mean was so helpful for me because that was the other thing that I think was like holding me back was I didn't it was like it would like break my heart to think about my ex showing up the way that I wanted him to with somebody else. And again, now that like people have really like heard like my breakup story, like Dorothy helped me really like think about that and reframe that for myself in a way that was so powerful that my ex wasn't capable of changing his mind on our relationship to show up in that way, and he was like shut down, but that has nothing to do with me. Like yes, like I had like quote unquote bad behavior in the past, but that had nothing to do with me now, right? That has nothing to do with like who I am or has nothing to define me as. And so it made me almost grateful and almost like the way I think about it now is like I almost honor like my ex and I want him to be like this emotionally connected human that he once was with some like I want that for him, like if it feels good for him to have. Now there were other things in our relationship I will say that were definitely not want matches, but especially that having that space to reframe, oh, if my ex is with somebody else and treats them the way I wanted to be treated, like what is going on with my ex that has nothing to do with me? And I gained so much compassion with that. And I gained so much, like, again, just like empowerment. And it reflected in my life too, because now, right, like I'm doing the same thing. I'm in a relationship where I show up completely differently than how I did, with my ex. And I want that for me.
Yeah.
So that was so helpful.
And I think it's good to notice too, like, what are you making it mean in terms of you? Because I think a lot of times when that happens, when people are afraid that their ex is going to move on and show up the way they want them to show up, all of that, what you just said, what's really happening is you're afraid that you're not going to get what you want if he's giving it to someone else.
Yeah.
And what you have to realize is that just because he's showing up a certain way with someone else, supposedly, we don't even know, If he were to do that, does that mean you don't get to be in a relationship with someone who's emotionally connected to you? Absolutely not, right? You're in the
Mhm.
relationship that now that's bigger and better than the relationship you just had. You have the
Mhm.
emotional connection, and you also have all these other want matches that you didn't get from the previous relationship. And so
Mhm.
I think that's what really holds people back, is saying, I'm not going to be able to have those things if my ex gives it to somebody else. And that's simply not true. You will actually have an even better relationship if you do this work, obviously.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And
So
then
good.
my last tidbit, I know I said this to you right before we popped on too, but you start the a sneak peek. You start the program with in order to get over your ex, you have to think you're over your ex. And you like start it that way, and then you're like, okay, we're gonna build up to that. And as a coach, and I've even like said that to clients about other things, and clients that are also coaches and work for like coaching schools are like, whoa, because that was so helpful. And throughout the entire program, because you seeded that, I really adopted that belief that I was over him. And yeah, like I just wanted to point that out and say like how powerful it was. So simple and like so obvious in a way, but so like mind blowing just to come back to that basic.
Isn't it so crazy? Thoughts create feelings, y'all, and feelings create actions, and actions will create your result.
Yeah.
So, I think it's very important to recognize that you will have to create a result of being over your ex, you have to show up like the version of you who's over your ex. But to show up that way, you have to feel over your ex. And to feel that way, you have to believe I'm over my ex. So
Mhm.
it might even be a transition of from I'm not over my ex to I'm willing to learn how to get over my ex to I'm learning how to get over my ex to I might be over my ex to I am almost over my ex to I'm really over my ex. And even those small gradual changes, not only are you changing thought, you're changing your feeling slash your vibration, your energy. When you change that, then you will naturally and organically change how you're showing up in the breakup, and then that ultimately creates your result. But I think it's just so important to come back to the basics when you're talking about that, because I think we forget it. And so inside of the program, again, kind of you're like saying sneak peek, one of the very first modules you talk about is being over your ex and what that means, and getting clear about tangibly what that means for you and tracking your progress. And that's in there. And it also ends, fascinating enough, we end with the same video. You
Mhm.
end with the same like core teaching of like being over your ex and believing that. And then at the very end, being over your ex and believing that. And it's really powerful.
Yeah. And I love how like not perfectionistic you are about it too. Like you also give a great example, and I've heard you say it multiple times, of how when one of your exes got married, you had this moment of like grief, and you were like, that doesn't mean I'm not over him. It means I had some thoughts and some feelings in a moment. And that has been so helpful for me after the program. You know, my ex two, so his sister and his cousin are two of my really good friends. And so I still like hear about him, or, you know, so on. We've talked like a couple of times since then. And knowing that, like if I had a thought or a feeling, because I think a lot of people, right, if we go back to like shame, like we'll be like, oh, it means I'm not over him because I feel this way. No, right? Like the majority of it is I have all of these other thoughts and feelings like that. If we're looking at like a scale, that side of the scale is like hitting the ground. And then of course I have like a couple of thoughts and a couple of feelings, and that doesn't mean that I'm not over my ex, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why I like making it tangible and measuring your progress throughout the program, of
Mm-hmm.
looking at where's your desire and your attachment. Because you could have, by the time my ex got married, I had zero desire for him. I had zero attachment, and I was pretty much living my bigger and better life. But when he got married, I could feel that 26-year-old version of me being like, wow, we thought that was going to be us.
Mhm.
Right. And that 26-year-old version of me, I was like, boo, I'm here for you. I can feel you crying. You know what I mean? So 100%. I love that.
Mhm. Yeah.
So tell me, if you could go back to the version of you who was like in the thick of it, you used the word raw, which I kind of liked. You were raw in the thick of your heartbreak. What would you tell her? What words of wisdom or advice would you give her?
Mm. That's a really good question. I I would tell her that there is a solution, and like, you're going to do it, and it's going to be simpler than you thought it would be. Like, simpler and easier and more fun than you thought it would be. Because at the time, in that pain, that is what I needed to hear.
Isn't that so true, though? I love that you said that. It's simpler and it's easier and actually more fun. And I think that is beautiful because we have this preconceived idea of how heartbreak goes, and we really like create that experience for ourselves from a preconceived
Mhm.
idea that it's hard, that it's super painful. And don't get me wrong, I don't think heartbreak is void of pain, but it is full of power and giddiness and excitement and fun and terrifying and so much more. There's such a like plethora of, different experiences within heartbreak, and it doesn't have to take forever. It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be complex.
Mhm.
And I think that's the beauty in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. Amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the brave hearts listening in?
Um, I Yeah, I mean, I would just like to share, because if somebody is like kind of on the verge, I would just like to say that, you know, this program, again, like I said, it was so simple, but you also give so much, and you guide. Like, I didn't feel like there was definitely like teaching, right? But I didn't feel like necessarily like I had to learn something like huge and like profound. Everything, like I said, was simple, but you guided, especially with the workbook, like, you guided me to that change, like every step of the way, especially through the workbook. So for anybody else that's listening, I would just want them to, and they're on the verge, maybe they're like thinking about that, thinking about it. I just want to offer, like, Dorothy puts so much, and again, it's not like you can't do this on your own, but if you are, able to, and if you're really thinking about it, I highly recommend going and investing in that guidance, because truly it changed my life so quickly, but also honing in on that simple solution and the basics is something that I really do feel like is in my bones now. It's in the way I like look at the world and like see the world now. I was telling you even before we hopped on, I'm building my program for my people, and how the Get Over Your Ex program had such, and I've been in a lot of coaching containers that were also great and awesome, and I'm sure I've took bits from them. But truly, the Get Over Your Ex program showed me how to give such a change in such a simple way with like so much love. And so I would just want people to know that and to hear that.
Thank you. I love that. I appreciate that. I'm very excited for you and your program. It'll
Me
be so
too.
fun. Yes. All right. Thank you so much for coming on, Jewel. We appreciate you. I know Bravehearts listening in really appreciate you being so vulnerable and open and sharing your journey. If they want to reach out and find you, where can they find you? Maybe they're wanting to work on their friendships, things like that. How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so right now, I started a new Instagram account. It's up and running, and it's just at Connection with Jewel. Jewel is spelled kind of like how you imagine like a gem. But you could also find me at jewelhohman.com. And learn more about the program or anything else, or just want to chat with me about anything that goes with friendships or social anxiety or social delight, I'd love to talk with you. And yeah.
Awesome. And we'll put all of that in the show notes for everyone. So it'll be easy for you to find her. But thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing day. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you want to learn how to get over your ex in 3 months or less to build a life better than the one you thought you had with your ex, I would like to personally invite you to my next group course where we take everything you've learned here on the podcast and apply it to your life. Come check it out at www.lifecoachdorothy.com.